This topic, we're going to cover some of the changes that have occurred to the Hurrtrak system over the last few years. And instead of doing a yearly one, we wanted to combine a few because some of the new features people need to get a refresher on, and these are what we consider the more important ones. So in this case, we're going to talk about the expertise analysis, some of the changes the Hurricane Center has made to the data recently, some mapping improvements. This was an important one, the slosh-based storm surge at the extended periods. Hopefully that'll make sense. Narrative impact statement improvements, and then a lot of under-the-cover type activity that we do every year in order to keep the system current. We'll talk a little bit about the latest NHC changes, and then a reminder of where you can get additional training opportunities. So first, expertise. This is something we've been doing for years, and it's a daily discussion. And you'll get more information on this that every customer has access to. Additional information the Hurricane Center is providing, we're kind of giving it away here. Hurricane Center now gives us additional data at 64 through 120 hours, and that'll just help the system calculate wind impacts, animations, really affects the entire system. Enhanced mapping capabilities, we've added some additional GIS type files that you can now customize your map in many different ways to your specific needs. This is that important one we talked about, is Hurricane Center does not provide estimates for storm surge more than a few days in advance. So our system will optionally, you control this, allow you to have the Hurrtrak system give you the best guess of what the possible storm surge levels could be for a storm more than a few days out. We've changed the way we do damage descriptions, taking into account forestry type information, so it's a much better description of the potential damage from a storm. Narrative impact statements, because of all the changes we've made that we've just mentioned, the narrative impact statement is much more accurate and robust than it used to be. The annual changes that we make are quite extensive: zip code data, security, usability. You can read some of these. The cone of uncertainty, watch and warning areas all change yearly. GIS updates, the National Weather Service zones, historical data, these are all up to date with each version. Then we'll look at the Hurricane Center changes, the most recent ones, as described on their website. And then finally, we'll remind you of where you can get additional training opportunities or options. You may have forgotten about where we put this, and if you're interested in a certain topic, this is the place to go. In this section, we're going to talk briefly about the expertise tab, or the expert analysis, which is the daily weather discussion that we do. It's presented on a video, and during the hurricane season, it's available within the Hurrtrak system by selecting the expertise tab or on the internet. During the off season, winter and spring, it's available only on the internet. We consider this a perpetual enhancement whereby anyone who keeps their software current will have access to these daily weather discussions from our meteorologist. An example of what it might look like in the spring months is a discussion on the severe weather potential, any current severe weather that's going on, and forecast rainfall for the upcoming period. in this case for the next week. So we try to provide interesting weather details for people who are interested in the weather and have a need to know due to their occupation or their interest. So again, we will continue to provide this service for all current Hurrtrak users. And that concludes this short topic. This topic has to do with the National Hurricane Center now including 34 and 50 knot wind radii at the extended forecast hours of 96 and 120. Rather mundane type topic, but it does have some implications. Within the forecast advisory, we have seen this information through 72 hours, and now they're going to be including it at these extended hours. What this does for you and for the system is allow for better estimation of wind impacts at those extended time frames of 4 and 5 days. The other significant change, Hurricane Center this year, is putting out 64 knot wind radii for the 60 and 72 hour positions. Before this, the Hurrtrak system would have to estimate those radii in order to do its calculations. Now we're getting some help from the Hurricane Center. Her Hurrtrak system still has to estimate it for the extended periods of 96 and 120. However, this is data that I think the Hurricane Center should have been providing for many years now, so I'm glad they're doing it now. So where that's beneficial now is instead of the Hurrtrak system having to estimate those wind radii as it has done in the past, it's one last thing that it has to estimate, and the Hurricane Center is providing this 34 knot wind and 50 knot wind radii for the system to use. Overall result will be better forecast in the extended time frames and better graphics and more accurate graphics. And some of those graphics would include the forecast wind bands, and the reports would include location reports as well as the animation graphics that you just saw. So that pretty much concludes this topic. Again, all of the changes related to this topic are done internally within the program software. In this video, we're going to talk about the slosh-based storm surge estimation. Before we go through these points, it's good to understand what slosh is. Briefly put, as it's described here, it stands for Sea Lake Overland Surges from Hurricanes. It's a model. It's a computerized numerical model developed by the National Weather Service to estimate storm surge heights resulting from historical, hypothetical, or predicted hurricanes, taking into account atmospheric pressure, storm size, forward speed, and track data. And then within that is more detailed data called MEOWs, and it's the maximum envelope of water. There's lots of acronyms here. Basically, it's a long-term study about what areas will flood based on storm strength, motion, and size. So that data has been in the Hurrtrak system for years. Up until now, it's only been used to display and create reports using the Slosh View program module, which all of you have. However, the detailed data, the MEOW data, which has only been part of the advanced system, is now part of every system, the EM Pro, the RM Pro, and the advanced. While the Slosh View program hasn't changed for those different versions, the usage of the slosh data has changed. So in 2023, we are now using this detailed data, the MEOW data, to estimate potential storm surge levels when, this is key, the National Hurricane Center's surge probability data is not yet available. And that's called P-surge. The Hurrtrak system has been shoving P-surge data for several years now. However, when the data is not available, there was really no estimate of storm surge for our locations. So for example, it's not available when the storm's landfall is too far out in the future, more than 36 hours, or sometimes there's a delay in the issuance of the P-surge data. Right now, this surge estimate is only included in the narrative impact statement, and it may be added to the standard impact reports at some time in the future. So bottom line, when there's a storm approaching an area and you run a location report, it now includes storm surge inundation estimates, or when the surge probability data is there, it uses that data to come up with the threat of storm surge for that particular location. And we'll see more of this when we look at the narrative impact statement section. Lastly, there is a new option which allows the user to turn this off or back on. And that shows up under the user options, the general section, the first one you see right here. And you might wonder, why would you want to turn it off? For some users, they're not interested in an estimate. They only want to look at the actual surge probability data put out by the National Hurricane Center, which are still estimates. It's just that they have a better estimate because it's closer in, as opposed to looking at data that could be several days out. So depending on who your audience is and their understanding of storm surge, you may want to turn this off or on. So with that, that concludes this topic. However, you're going to see a lot more about this in the narrative impact statement section. In this section, we're going to talk about the enhancements to the narrative impact statements. This is best described by dissecting one of these via some example data from the Hurrtrak system. So once again, we're going to use Hurricane Ian approaching from the southwest. In this case, we do have the surge probability data. Later, we're going to show you a narrative impact statement without the surge probability data. So when we run the report on a location group, in this case, the National Hurricane Center watch and warning points, we see the information that we saw in the last section, where we have different locations: damage, devastating, major, moderate, minor, etc. So what I did is export this information to, I'll do it right here, the executive style report. I will just do a preview, and it creates this report, and there are your narrative impact statements. In order to better describe the changes, I went ahead and exported this to a Word document so that we can highlight each section. So here is an example for Fort Myers Beach. Let's highlight each section that has changed from the 2022 version of Hurrtrak. This first section has changed to where you now see, if I can get this done correctly, there we go. It talks about a potentially devastating impact, and it has separated the devastating wind gust of 143 miles per hour and a major storm surge is possible. So there's your two descriptors. The next section that has changed is down here. This information about the arrival of winds, etc. has remained unchanged. But the wind damage from Hurricane Ian now is much more descriptive for winds of 143 miles per hour. If this was in an area with large trees, there'd probably be additional information about power outages. The next section that changed, or really the last section, is the information about storm surge. In this case, we're using surge probability. So it says there is a good chance that Fort Myers Beach could experience a storm surge of 13 feet above ground level, and we're using anything above 50%. We do say refer to local statements for more precise information on expected surge flooding. And finally, we do indicate whether this report was issued using advanced wind estimation or not. Here's the report for Boca Grande, and all those sections highlighted, including information about the eye wall being experienced by certain locations. In this example, the wind speeds forecasted are much more damaging than the storm surge expected. So now let's take a look at the narrative impact statement when the surge probability data is not yet available. In this example, using Advisory 19, there was no surge probability data available. We used the slash method, and everything else is the same as far as sections added. However, down here, the wording has changed, that there's a potential that Fort Myers Beach could experience a surge of 15 feet above ground level. No longer is there a percentage placed on it. And then it's emphasized that this is an estimate and refer to local statements for more precise information. Other than that, the narrative impact statements are the same. Just as a refresher, the narrative impact statements are part of the executive reports, the risk impact reports, several different outputs. On the EM Pro, you don't have access to the executive and the risk reports or some of the summary reports, but you are able to select a location, right-click on it, and copy, if I can get it to do it, copy the narrative impact statement to a clipboard or email it. So the bottom line is we've vastly improved the narrative impact statements with additional slash data and more descriptions and better description of wind and slash data, storm surge data. And that concludes this topic. Another short topic, we feel like we should mention that each version, each update includes a lot of updates to the underlying data. The annual updates to the forecast cone radii, the watches and warnings, the historical data, the National Weather Service zone data changes each year, some of the graphical information, the GIS updates, and all of this gets put into the new versions from year to year. This year we did update the zip code population data, which we do about once every 2 or 3 years. And all of the historical data is up to date. So without going into all the details, I just want you to understand that we do update this information constantly and certainly year to year. And in addition, we look at our wind estimation routines and tweak those based on prior storm data and see if we can't improve the estimation routines. And that concludes this little topic. This topic is going to discuss the enhanced mapping capabilities. These enhanced mapping capabilities are in 4 modules: the primary Hurrtrak tracking program, the forecast model display, the reconnaissance display, and the observation program. This is probably the most complex enhancement for 2022 and one of the more important ones. The usage of this new feature is pretty much identical for the model display, the recon display, and the observation program. The Hurrtrak program, the Hurrtrak tracking program, is a little bit different. So we're going to focus first on the simpler application of this function, which is in the model, recon, and observation program. So let's look at each one. Once we do one, it's going to become a little bit repetitive. And the other key thing to keep in mind with this is we're actually introducing the concept of layers. Anyone familiar with GIS systems understands that layers bring in different layers of information, whether it's rivers, lakes, borders, geographical features, locations, things like that. Each can be considered a different layer. So keep that in mind as we now get into this topic a little deeper. So let's start with the forecast model display program. And this is how it would look when you first bring it up with the default or the pre-installed layers. Might be a little bit busy for you until you zoom in, but that's where the good news comes, is you have complete control of how much of this background information you're going to display. And we're using last August 28th storm, which hit Louisiana. So let's zoom in a bit, get a feel. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of information on this in addition to the forecast models. What we're going to do now is come up in the upper left portion. It says Overlay Control Center. When you click on it, it brings up another window which shows you all of the layers that are either pre-installed and displayed or pre-installed and hidden. There's only one that's really hidden here in this case. So what you can do is decide which layers you don't want or want to display when you use the model display program. So for example, you could hide everything and you'll be back to the way it used to be in 2021, which is just a simple map. Some people may prefer that. Other folks may decide that they want to see more features. So let's look at each of these functions. Since we already have some overlays that are loaded and hidden, why don't we unhide some of those, and we're going to start with this function to hide and show. So let's say World Rivers, we decide we want to see that. Just hit show, and there it is. You can go back and hide it later if you want. World Lakes, we just added some lakes. So now as you can see, we've changed the background of the map, or the layers on the map. And we have different areas for Mexico, Cuba, Dominican Republic. Really depends what you want to hide or show. In this case, we're going to show world borders. Geographical lines shows the Tropic of Cancer, Capricorn. And so it starts filling your map up. U.S. freeway system, you may or may not want to show that. So let's close this for a second and see what our map looks like. You might decide, okay, that's the kind of map I want. But gee, you know, I'd like to see the state borders a little bit better. Let me go back to this section, see if I have state borders. So as I look at this list, I don't see state borders. So let's look at another function called Load Overlay. You select this, it brings up all of the pre-installed overlays, and you come down and go, well, there's USA state borders. So you select that, and it's now displayed here on the bottom. Now you might want to make them a little more prominent. So this is where we get into some of the more advanced features, and some of this will be trial and error. But you can come over to Overlay Options once you've selected it, and you might want the color to be different than black, but in this case we want our weight to be a little heavier. So we're going to say 2. Hit 2, and you may notice that now the state borders have become darker. Let's look at a different layer, which is not lines but points. So let's say populated places. Right now it's hidden, so let's show it, and there they are. And there's 3 different populated places, few, most, and many, I think. I think I picked the most here. But again, let's go down and look at World Populated Places Overlay Options. And we have selected to label the name, which is what you see here. But you could have picked a different one, which I'm not sure what makes sense, but scale rank will tell you the scale. These are little numbers here. Label rank, I'm not sure what those are, but go with the simplest one. You can also change the label color. Perhaps you don't want it to be black or yellow, so you want to make them green. All right, so you can play with those options when you are using the Overlay Control Center. So let's look at a couple of the other functions. Load overlay we've covered. Import GIS file is only for Hurrtrak advanced users. This is where if you have a shape file, you can select that shape file and it'll then become a layer that you can load in the future. Hide or show overlay, I think we've already shown you that. You can show the freeway system in this case, I just select it, or you can hide it. Remove overlay will remove it so you won't see it again, hidden or displayed, until you come back and do a load overlay. Auto load overlay is kind of a leftover. When you do load an overlay, it becomes automatically auto loaded. It's hard to say. Finally, move to top is when you have a lot of layers, sometimes the layer that you want to be on the top is on the bottom. And there are lots of other layers and options you can do. Luckily, what we've done is preloaded what we think is the most popular layers for you. And then you can change it from there by removing or adding, or showing or hiding. Now there's a couple escape hatches here. Let's say you've done a bunch of things and you really don't like the changes you've made. Just hit close and don't save and then exit the program. When you reopen the program, all the changes you made have been removed. So this is back to the default. But you might forget. You might decide you're going to hide all, and then you forget and you exit the program. And when you come back in, everything's gone, and you come back here and you go, now what do? I don't remember what was on, what was off. Reset the defaults, your escape hatch. If you select that, exit the program, come back in, and you're back to the starting point. So what I suggest for most people is to look at the map. This is for each module. This is for the forecast model program, and decide, those locations, they're just a little bit overbearing, and I don't need locations, for example. So come up to world populated places and go ahead and hide that. And maybe you don't like these Mount Mitchell, these geographical areas. In this case, they're called landmarks. So go ahead and hide that. And finally, the freeways, maybe you don't want those. So now you've got a map, maybe that has enough detail on it that you're happy with. Just close, exit the program, come back in, and from now on, that's the map you're going to be looking at. Now, the recon and the observation program are identical. This may look similar to the model program, but there are some slight changes. But perhaps when you're looking at hurricane reconnaissance data, you want to look at different information as opposed to when you're looking at forecast models. Again, you could just come up with the overlay control center. These are separate for each program. The one that's for the recon is different than the one for the model forecast, is different than the observation program, is different than the main Hurrtrak program. And again, you can come in and make the changes to those layers and maintain those every time you use this program. So I've added some data. This is actually a training flight, high-res data that they did today in late April. And they're at upper levels. And that's why you see so many arrows or so much data. When you zoom in is where you see the separate observations. That's how your recon program works. Now, if there was a hurricane, you'd be looking at them flying around the center. So we'll go through these functions one more time. We'll do it with we'll do it this program, in case you missed it the first time. When you bring this up, it shows you all of the overlays that are preloaded on the install, which ones are displayed and hidden. And for some reason, we keep hiding Cuba. Let's show Cuba. And for the recon program, it actually may make sense, because it shows their geographical areas, and in a lot of cases the recon flight cannot fly over these areas of Cuba. So once again, you can load an overlay. If you're interested, for example, in where the leases are in the Gulf of Mexico, there they are. You might decide you don't want to see that every time, so you may hide it. Active leases, hide, but it will be in your options to select in the future. Hide or show, I think we've covered that. You may see this occasionally and wonder why you see it. You do have to select something for it to act upon it. And it doesn't make any assumptions that because you've had world borders before, it's going to be on world borders again. You're going to have to find world borders. Then select the option. Remove overlay, you won't see it in the future. We'll do that now for that active leases. Auto load, again, that's a function that is no longer really used. Then the overlay options is where I think you need to play around a bit. I mean, you could label rivers, you can change their color. For example, world lakes, you can put the name of the lake next to it if you want, changing the color, and actually the color is important. One thing is when you pick a body of water and you go to change the colors, you do that by selecting that. This gives you the little hint, but here's all the colors, but down here are your default land and water colors. So if you're adding lakes, you may want to maintain the same watercolor as the ocean. You would select that, which we did earlier. And then your body of water will be the same as the pre-selected default for the ocean. I don't want to ramble on, but the main point is when you get into overlay options, it won't hurt you to come in and change a few things in here, play with it, maybe change the color of the water to red, fool around. There's a red down here. And then when you're done, say, well, that was fun. Now I've learned how to use this function. Let's reset to default, exit the program, come back in, and then start over again. So you're never going to destroy everything. You can always reset to the default. Now the observation program, I won't go into all of the details on that because it's identical to what we just covered in the forecast model and the hurricane reconnaissance program. But there is your overlay control center. Here are your controls, and you can add or get rid of different layers. So next we're going to go to the Hurrtrak program, which is a little bit different. Okay, we've opened up the hurricane tracking program, the main one that pretty much everyone uses, and we have opened up Ida, put it in post-storm analysis so that we can actually use the position of Ida in the Gulf of Mexico, and you can do your usual functions. But notice the background map has more layers on it than what you've seen in the past, and that's because we're using the pre-selected defaults. If you zoom in, it's just going to redraw that map with those same layers. Understand, everything we're going to talk about with the Overlay Control Center deals with the dynamic maps, not the fixed maps that were part of the original system 20 years ago that we maintain still. So for example, if I go to one of the fixed maps, Western Atlantic, it has none of this layering on it, because fixed maps are exactly that. They're pre-drawn, and I'd like to sort of get rid of them from the system, but some people still use them, so we still keep them as being available. Good news is if you're using a map like that and then you go zoom in, it immediately goes to a dynamic map, which brings in all those layers. So don't be surprised by that if you're looking at one of the pre-installed fixed maps and you don't see the layering information on it. This is just for the dynamic maps, which typically occur when you pan or zoom, or when you first draw an area. It's using dynamic maps. So how is this different than what we've just learned about the Overlay Control Center? Well, as you notice, you're looking at a tracking chart, and if you come over here, there is no Overlay Control Center. So okay, well, how do I change my background layering map, or my background maps? You must go to the Map Selection tab, the one highlighted here. That is the tab that generates all these maps. Then you can come up here and select Overlay Control Center, and you can perform the same functions that we just spent some time describing. I won't go into all of those, but let's say you really want a plain map for some reason. So you might want to hide everything, and you still get some of the mapping that's natural to the system. But it becomes more of a plain map, and if you notice, if you zoom out, some of those extra details go away. So that's the built-in functions of the system. So if you're using a tracking map here, for example, and you zoom in at this point, all of the layering is gone. Zoom out, you're back to a plain map again. So any future map that gets drawn after you've changed the Map Selection tab will then reflect the new layers that the Map Selection tab show. In this case, we've hidden everything, but if we want to show everything, this includes counties, the whole works. Now, if you show your map, and I'm going to different maps here and just kind of re-panning or zooming, you're going to see the new layers that we've identified here. So that is the only difference. Is in order to control your mapping, you must go to the Map Selection tab and select Overlay Control Center. I'm going to reset the defaults. Since we made a bunch of changes, exit the program. So I've restarted the program. I'm going to select a map layer, a map area, and go ahead and perform all the functions that I normally would with your new background maps. Now, some of my favorite overlay layers is the urban areas. You see in a yellow hash. Let me show you what that looks like with overlay options. What I have is a fill color with a diagonal crosshash, and that blends well with the background map. If I were to do something like solid, that's not going to look too good. Notice how it turns a bright yellow. But if you like that bright yellow, or if you like what I did, which you should, you can go back to diagonal. Also, the national parks are shown. Rivers, it's up to you if you want to show all the rivers in Cuba or Haiti, Dominican Republic. And you may find, if you're a Hurrtrak Advanced user, you want to load a shapefile as one of your layers. So we're on the Map Selection tab. Go to Overlay Control Center, and now you select Import GIS File, and it's going to look for shapefiles. I already have some shapefiles out here, and we're going to select Cuba roads. Here they are. I'm going to say Open. Comes up with this type screen, conversion parameters. Typically, you just hit Continue. And when it's done, you can already see down here all these Cuban roads. It'll now be a layer so that you can hide or you can show. So let's take a look at what we did. And also understand sometimes this conversion can take very long. This one took, because of the huge number of roads in Cuba, took about a minute or so. And you probably wouldn't want to keep this, but let's zoom in to the Isle of whatever they call it now. It used to be Isle of Pines. And now you have all the roads in Cuba. And I don't know what town that is, but it gives you some pretty neat capabilities. So now that we're deep into the roads of Cuba, if you want, you can come in here, do overlay options, and let's look at the name of these roads. And now you've got the street names. In these cases, they use a lot of numbers. So we've kind of gone a little bit crazy there. But anyway, that's how you can load, if you're a Hurrtrak Advanced user, any shapefile you want. We did not make Cuba roads one of the pre-shipped layers because we just don't think that's something that many people are going to use. So I think that really covers this topic. The good news is you can play with it, reset the defaults, and get back to what you had before. But each user can customize their own maps. If you want to get rid of all the layers, you can do that. If you want to add layers, you can do that. Whatever you think suits you the best. So remember, on the Hurrtrak system, you have to be on the Map Selection tab to get to the Overlay Control Center. With the other programs that we showed you, it's just there by default. This is the model program, just to be redundant, the recon program, it's right there. And with the current observation program, unless I changed it, there we go, it's right there. So with that, that completes this topic. In this video, we're just going to go over the changes that the National Hurricane Center is making to its products in 2025. Not all of these impact the Hurrtrak system, some do, so it's some of these will just be general information. The first one they're mentioning here is the updated experimental cone graphic depicting inland watches and warnings. Now, we've always had inland watches and warnings for the last few years, and Hurrtrak does depict those. But they're saying here is they're adding it to their graphics, and you can see an example of that on their website. They're now adding a Riptide risk map, which is something new. And again, this is a product that they're putting out on their website. You can see all of this, by the way, if you go to the National Hurricane Center website in more detail. They have updated their procedures for putting out potential tropical cyclone advisories. Used to be only within I think 48 hours, and now they're expanding that further out in time to 72 hours. Actually, it was 36. So that's just a change in their procedures with the forecasters. This is the one we've mentioned earlier. They've updated the forecast advisory to include hurricane force wind radii at hours 60 and 72. So that does impact the Hurrtrak system. They're adding information for storm surge to the Hawaiian Islands. They've also updated the forecast error cone, and we have updated that within the Hurrtrak system, so you don't have to worry about that. Some of this dates back a year or so, but they're issuing watches and warnings at the intermediate advisory time, not just the primary advisory times. In other words, advisory 12A could have a change in watches and warnings. It used to be that only the full advisories, the 12, 13, 14, as an example, would have those changes. A little information about how they're going to pronounce the storms, social media, and other information on the web. So again, this is on their website if you want to look at it in more detail. And that concludes this topic. Each year we like to remind folks where they can get additional information on the Hurrtrak system. There's basically 4 items. One is the documentation, online help, context-sensitive help, and the internet training videos. So let's go through each one briefly. If you go to the help screen, and there's usually tab help and regular help, select the regular help one, and you can display system documentation. It's 394 pages, so we suggest if you're actually going to go through that, to download it to your system, and then you can view it with your PDF, Adobe PDF viewer. That'll allow you to easily search for terms, items, and sections. But it is quite complete, and in a world where people do not really look at documentation anymore, we still supply the physical documentation for the individuals that like the printed page. The online help can be obtained by selecting help and then contents, and that takes you to general help on the internet, and you can pick different sections on general information, the system components, some how-tos, and a lot of appendices. So that's another way you can get information without looking at the manual. The third way is context sensitive. If you're on a screen, let's say, for example, the general screen here, if you select Tab Help, it will bring up help specific to the screen you're looking at and information about it. If you go to another page, or let's say the Map Selection tab, and you select Tab Help, it'll bring up information on that tab and how that works. This can be very helpful as you navigate the system. Finally, if you go to the PC Weather Products homepage, which is pcwp.com, and select Online Training Videos, you will find more information than you ever wanted on the system and a training video for each section. Be sure, if you use this option, to click to expand all the topics so you can see all the additional topics that have been included. So hopefully, if you're stuck on one section or have a question about one section, you can just go right to that section. For example, how to set up automatic email alerts, and you'll get a 39-minute video on that. But there are some that are designed for new users, refreshers, and then each year we have a training supplement such as the one you're looking at right now. Don't be concerned that the Hurrtrak for new users may be dated a few years ago, since we're covering some of the basic functions that haven't changed over the years. Reviewing those videos and then coming up to date with the training supplements would be an excellent way of being trained on the system. So hopefully with all that additional information you could become a Hurrtrak expert. That concludes this topic.